Hello and most welcome to 1144 of the Heidegger series. And finally, we have some Heideggerian stuff here. I will read this article or chapter from the book. Deconstruction and Philosophy, edited by John Sallis, and their text of Jacques Derrida. Chapter 12, page 161, I found Geschlecht 2, Heidegger's hand, and I will pair that with David Bohm's principle of the hollow movement. Hollow movement is something that encompasses all oppositions, all contradictions, and it can only be understood as long as you allow contradictions to enter your thinking mind. Heidegger's hand, Geschlecht 2. I must begin with some precautions. They all come down to asking your pardon and indulgence for what in particular touches on the form and status of this lecture. This reading on all the presuppositions I ask you to take account of. In effect, I presuppose the reading of a brief and modest essay published under the title Geschlecht, Sexual Difference, Ontological Difference. This essay, published and translated more than a year ago, began some work I have taken up again only this year in the course of a seminar I am giving in Paris under the title Philosophical Nationality and Nationalism. For lack of time, I can reconstitute neither the introductory article entitled Geschlecht nor all the developments that form in my seminar on philosophical nationality and nationalism. Nevertheless, I shall strive to make the presentation of these few reflections, still preliminary, as intelligible and independent of all these invisible contexts as possible. Another precaution, another call for your pardon and indulgence. For lack of time, I shall present only a part, or rather several fragments, at times a bit discontinuous, of the work I am following this year in the slow rhythm of a seminar engaged in a difficult reading, one that I would like to be as meticulous and careful as possible of certain Heidegger texts, most notably Was heißt danken, and above all the lecture on Trakl in Unterwegs zur Sprache. I want to thank John Louis very warmly for the invaluable and decisive aid he gave me once more in the translation and the presentation of this unfinished work. We are going to speak then of Heidegger. We are also going to speak of monstrosity. We are going to speak of the word Geschlecht. I'm not going to translate it for the moment. Doubtless, I shall translate it at no moment. But you know that according to the context that come to determine this word, it can be translated by sex, race, species, genus, gender, stock, family, generation, or genealogy, community. In the seminar on philosophical nationality and nationalism, before studying certain texts of Marx, Quinet, Michelet, Tocqueville, Wittgenstein, Adorno, Hannah Arendt, we had encountered the word Geschlecht in a very sketchy reading of Fichte. Was an Geistigkeit und Freiheit dieser Geistigkeit glaubt und die ewige Fortbildung dieser Geistigkeit durch Freiheit will, das, wo es auch geboren sei und in welcher Sprache es rede, ist unsers Geschlechts. Es gehört uns an und es wird sich zu uns tun. The French translation neglects to translate the word Geschlecht. No doubt because the translation was done during or just after the war, I think by S. Yankelevich, and under conditions that made the word race particularly dangerous and moreover not pertinent for translating Fichte. But what does Fichte mean when he develops in this way what he calls then his fundamental principle, Grundsatz, to wit, that of a circle, Kreis, or alliance, Bund, of an engagement that constitutes precisely belonging to our Geschlecht. All those who believe in spirituality and the freedom of that spirit, all those who want the eternal and progressive formation of this spirituality through freedom, die ewige Fortbildung, and if Fichte is nationalistic, in a sense rather enigmatic, so that we can speak of it here very quickly. He is so a progressive, a republican, and cosmopolist. One of the themes of the seminar I am currently working on concerns just the paradoxical but regular association of nationalism with cosmopolitanism and with the humanism. They are all part of our Geschlecht. They all belong to us and have to do business with us wherever they are born or whatever tongue they speak. So this Geschlecht is not determined by birth, native soil, or race, has nothing to do with the natural or even the linguistic, at least in the usual sense of this term, for we are able to recognize in Fichte a kind of claim of the idiom of the German idiom. Certain citizens, German by birth, remain strangers to this idiom of the idiom. Certain non-Germans can attain it since engaging themselves in this circle or this alliance of spiritual freedom and its infinite progress, they would belong to our Geschlecht. The sole analytic and unimpeachable determination of Geschlecht in this context is the we, the belonging to the we who are speaking at this moment. At the moment when Fichte addresses himself to this supposed, but still to be constituted community. A community that stricto sensu is neither political, nor racial, nor linguistic, but that can receive his allocution, his address, or his apostrophe. And can think with him and can say we in some language and from whatever birthplace. Geschlecht is an ensemble, a gathering together. One could say Versammlung, an organic community in a non-natural but spiritual sense that believes in the infinite progress of the spirit through freedom. So it is an infinite we, a we that announces itself to itself from the infinity of a telos, of freedom and spirituality. And that promises, engages, or allies itself according to the circle, Kreis, Bund, of this infinite will. How is Geschlecht to be translated under these conditions? Fichte uses a word that already has in his language a vast wealth of semantic determinations, and he speaks German. Despite what he says, anyone in whatever language he or she speaks ist unsers Geschlechts. He says this in German, and this Geschlecht is an essential Deutschheit. Even if the word Geschlecht has rigorous content only from out of the we instituted by that very address. It also includes connotations indispensable to the minimal intelligibility of discourse. And these connotations belong irreducibly to German more essential than all the phenomena of empiric Germanness, but to some German. All these connoted senses are co-present in the use of the word Geschlecht. They virtually appear in that use, but no sense is fully satisfying. How is one to translate? One can recoil before the risk and omit the word as the French translator did. One can also judge the word so open and undetermined by the concept it designated. To wit, a we, a spiritual freedom, engaged toward the infinity of its progress, that the omission of this word does not lose much. The we finally comes down to humanity of man, to the teleological essence of humanity that is announced par excellence in Deutschheit. Menschengeschlecht is often said for the genre humain. Humankind, human species, human race. In the Heidegger text we shall be concerned with in a few minutes, the French translators sometimes speak of genre humain for Geschlecht, and sometimes very simply of species. For here the question is nothing less, I venture to say, that the problem of man, of man's humanity, and of humanism, but situated where language no longer lets itself be effaced. Already for Fichte, it is not the same thing to say the humanity of man and Menschlichkeit. When he says, ist unser Geschlecht, he is thinking of Menschlichkeit and not of Humanität, of Latin ancestry. The fourth discourse is by far consonant with those Heidegger texts to come on Latinness. Fichte distinguished the dead language cut off from the living root and the living language animated by an inspiring breath. When a language from its first phonemes arises from the common and uninterrupted life of a people whose intuitions that language continues to expose, the invasion of a foreign people changes nothing. The intruders can rise only up to this primordial language, unless one day they can assimilate the intuitions of the stamfolk. Of the people stock for whom these intuitions are inseparable from the language. Und so bilden nicht sie die Sprache, sondern die Sprache bildet sie. They do not form the language forms them. Conversely, when a people adopts another language, developing the designation of supra-sensible things, without, however, totally handing itself over to the influence of this foreign language, the sensible language is not altered by this event. In all peoples, Fichte notes, children learn that part of the language turned toward sensible things as if the signs for those things were arbitrary. Willkürlich. The children must reconstitute the past development of the national language, but in this sensible sphere, in diesem sinnlichen Umkreise, each sign can become altogether clear thanks to vision or the immediate contact with a designated or signified thing. Bezeichneten. Here I stress the sign, Zeichen, for in a moment we shall come to the sign as monstrosity. In this passage, Fichte uses the word Geschlecht in the narrow sense of generation. At most, the result of this would be that the first generation, das erste Geschlecht, of people which thus changed his language would be compelled when adults men to go back to the years of childhood. End of quote. Here Fichte is bent on distinguishing Humanität and Menschlichkeit. For a German, these words of Latin origin, Humanität, Popularität, Liberalität, resound as if they were void of sense, even if they appear sublime, and make etymology something of interest. Besides, it's the same in the Latin or Neo-Latin peoples who know nothing of the etymology and believe these words belong to their maternal tongue. Muttersprache. But I say Menschlichkeit to a German, and you would be understood without any other historical explanation. Besides, it is useless to state that the man is a man and to speak of the Menschlichkeit of a man about whom one knows very well that he is not an ape or a savage beast. A Roman would not have responded in that way, Fichte believes, because if for the German, Menschheit or Menschlichkeit always remains a sensible concept. For the Roman, humanitas had become the symbol of a suprasensible, übersinnliche idea. From their origins, the Germans, they too, have joined together concrete intuitions in an intellectual concept of humanity. Always opposed to animality, and one would surely be wrong to see in the intuitive relation they preserve with Menschlichkeit a sign of inferiority with respect to the Romans. Nevertheless, the artificial introduction of words of foreign origin, singularly Roman, into the German tongue risks debasing the moral level of their own way of thinking. But there is, concerning language, image, and symbol, an irrevocable nature of the national imagination. This schematic recall seemed necessary to me for two reasons. On the one hand, in order to underline the difficulty of translating this sensible, critical, and sensitive word, Geschlecht. On the other hand, in order to indicate its irreducible bond to the question of humanity versus animality, and of humanity whose name, as the bond of the name to the thing, if one can say that, remains as problematic as that of the language in which the name is written. What does one say when one says Menschheit, Humanitas, Humanität, mankind, etc., or when one says Geschlecht or Menschengeschlecht? Is one saying the same thing? I also recall in passing the criticism Marx addressed in the German ideology to the socialist Grün, whose nationalism appealed, according to Marx's ironic expression, to a human nationality better represented by the Germans than by the other socialists. In the letter addressed in November 1945 to the academic rectorate of Albert Ludwig University, Heidegger explains his own attitude during the Nazi period. He had thought, he said, that he would be able to distinguish between the national and nationalism, that is, between the national and a biologist and racist ideology. I thought that Hitler, after taking responsibility in 1933 for the whole people, would venture to extricate himself from the party and its doctrine. And that the whole would meet on the terrain of a renovation and a gathering together with a view to a responsibility for the West. This conviction was an error that I recognized from the events of 30th June 1934. I, of course, had intervened in 33 to say yes to the national and the social, and not to the intellectual and metaphysical grounds on which the biologism of the party doctrine rested. Because the social and the national, as I saw them, were not essentially tied to a biologist's and racist ideology. The condemnation of biologism and racism, as of the whole ideological discourse of Rosenberg, inspires numerous Heidegger texts. Whether it be the discourse of the rectorate or the courses on Hölderlin and Nietzsche, whether it be also the question of technology, always put in perspective against the utilization of knowledge for technical and utilitarian ends, against the Nazis' professionalization and their making university knowledge profitable. I shall not reopen today the dossier of Heidegger's politics. I have done that in other seminars. And we have today rather large number of texts available for deciphering the classic and henceforth a bit academic dimensions of this problem. But all that I shall now attempt will keep an indirect relation to another, perhaps less visible dimension of the same drama. Today I shall begin then by speaking of that monstrosity I announced a few moments ago. This will be another detour through the question of man and of the we that gives its enigmatic content to a Geschlecht. Why monster? Not in order to make the thing pathetic, nor because we are always near some monstrous Unheimlichkeit when we are prowling around the nationalist thing and the thing named Geschlecht. What is un montre? You know the polysemic gamut of this word, the uses one can make of it, for example, concerning norms and forms, species and genus, gender. Thus concerning Geschlecht, I shall begin by privileging here another course. It goes in the direction, the sens, of a less known sense, since in French, la monstre, a changing of gender, sex or Geschlecht, has the poetico-musical sense of a diagram that shows, montre. In a piece of music, the numbers of verses and the number of syllables assigned to the poet. Monstrer is montrer, to show or demonstrate, and une montre is une montre, a watch. I'm already settled in the untranslatable idiom of my language, for I certainly intend to speak to you about translation. La monstre, ou montre? Montre?
Montre.
Montre.
Yes, montre.
La montre, then, prescribes the division of a line of verse for a melody. Le montre, or la montre, is what shows in order to warn or put him on guard. In the past, la montre in French was written la montre with an S. I choose this melopoetic example because the monster I am going to speak to you about comes from a well-known poem of Hölderlin, Mnemosyne, that Heidegger often contemplates, interrogates, and interprets. In the second of its three versions, the one that Heidegger cites in Was heißt danken, one reads the famous stanza, ein Zeichen sind wir, deutungslos, schmerzlos und wir, und haben fast die Sprache in der Fremde verloren. Among the three French translations of this poem, there is one by the translators of Was heißt denken, Alois Becker and Gerard Granel, translated Hölderlin in Heidegger. This translation uses the word montre for Zeichen in a style that had first seemed to me a bit mannered and Gallicizing, but which on reflection seemed to me in any case to give occasion for thought. Nous sommes une montre privée de sang. Nous sommes hors douleur. Et nous avons perdu presque la langue à l'étranger. We are monsters void of sense. We are outside sorrow and have lost nearly all, our tongue in foreign lands. Leaving aside the allusion to the tongue lost in foreign lands, which would lead me back too quickly to the seminar on nationality, I want to stress the first we monster. We are a monster and singular, a sign that shows and warns, but all the more singular since showing, signifying, designating, this sign is void of sense. Deutungslos. It says itself void of sense, simply and doubly monster. This we are sign, showing, informing, warning, pointing a sign toward, but in truth toward nothing. A sign out of the way, in a gapped relation to the sign. Display, montre, that deviates from the display or monstration of monstrosity. A monstrosity of monstration. And that is we. We, inasmuch as we have nearly lost our tongue in foreign lands, perhaps in translation, but this we, the monster, is it man? The translation of Zeichen by montre has a triple virtue. It recalls a motif at work ever since Sein und Zeit, the bond between Zeichen and Zeigen, or Aufzeigung, between the sign and monstration. Paragraph 17. Verweisung und Zeichen analyzed the Zeigen eines Zeichen, the showing of the sign, and lightly touches in passing the question of the fetish. In Unterwegs zur Sprache, Zeichen und Zeigen are linked with Sagen. More precisely, with the High German idiom sagen. Sagen heißt zeigen, erscheinen, sehen und hören lassen. Further on, to name the said, die Sage, we employed an old word, well warranted, but no longer in use, die Zeige, la montre. The second virtue of the French translation by montre has value only in the Latin idiom, since the translation stresses this gap concerning the normality of the sign, of a sign that for once is not what it should be, shows or signifies nothing, shows the pas de sang, no sense, and announces the loss of the tongue. The third virtue of this translation poses the question of man. I omit here a long development that seemed necessary to me on what deeply binds a certain humanism and a certain Europocentric universalism. And I hastily move toward the interpretation of Mnemosyne by Heidegger. The we of ein Zeichen sind wir. Is it indeed a we men? Numerous indications would give one the thought that the response of the poem remains rather ambiguous. If we were we men, this humanity would be determined in a way justly rather monstrous, apart from the norm, and notably from the humanist norm. But Heidegger's interpretation that prepares and gives access to this Hölderlin citation says nothing about man, and then too about Geschlecht, about the Geschlecht and the word Geschlecht that still awaits us in the text on Traco, in Unterwegs zur Sprache. The hand will be monstrous, sign le montre, the proper of man as monstrous, sign, in the sense of Zeichen. The hand reaches and extends, receives and welcomes, not just things. The hand extends itself and receives its own welcome in the hand of the other. The hand keeps, the hand carries, the hand designs and signs. Presumably, man is a monstrous sign. Die Hand zeichnet, vermutlich, weil der Mensch ein Zeichen ist. This seminar of 1951 to 52 is later than the letter on humanism that withdraws the question of being from the metaphysical or onto theological horizon of classic humanism. Dasein is not the homo of this humanism. So we are not going to suspect Heidegger of simply falling back into that humanism there. On the other hand, the date and the thematic of this passage accord it to that thought of the gift. Of giving and of the es gibt that overflows without reversing the anterior formation of the question of the sense of being. in order to situate more precisely what one could call here the thought of the hand, but just as well the hand of thought, of a thought of the human Geschlecht, of a thought claiming to be non-metaphysical. Let us remark that this develops itself in one moment of the seminar that repeats the question of teaching of thought, in particular in the university, as the place of sciences and techniques. It is in this passage that I cut out, so to speak, the form and the passage of the hand of Heidegger. The issue of Le Herné, in which I published Geschlecht 1, bore on its cover a photograph of Heidegger showing him a studied and significant choice, holding his pen with both hands above a manuscript. Even if he never used it, Nietzsche was the first thinker of the West to have a typewriter, whose photograph we know. Heidegger himself could write only with a pen, with the hand of a craftsman, not a mechanic, as the text in which we are going to become interested prescribes. Since then, I have studied all the published photographs of Heidegger, especially in an album bought at Freiburg when I had given a lecture there about Heidegger in '79. The play and the theater of hands in that album would merit a whole seminar. If I did not forego that, I would stress the deliberately craftsmanlike staging of the hand play, of the monstration and demonstration that is exhibited there, whether it be a matter of handling of the pen or the maneuver of the cane that shows rather than supports. Or of the water bucket near the fountain. The demonstration of hands is as gripping in the accompaniment of the discourse. On the cover of the catalogue, the only thing that overflows the frame, that of the window, but also of the photo, is Heidegger's hand. The hand is monstrosity, the proper of man as being a monstration. This distinguishes him from every other Geschlecht, and above all, from the ape. The hand cannot be spoken about without speaking of techniques. Heidegger just recalled that the problem of university teaching resulted from the fact that the sciences belongs to the essence of techniques, not to techniques, but to the essence of techniques. Techniques remains plunged in a fog for which no one is responsible, neither science, nor the scientist, nor man in general. Simply what gives rise the most to thinking, das Bedenklichste, is that we do not yet think. Who? We. All of us, Heidegger specifies, including him who speaks here, and even him the very first. To be the first among those who do not yet think. Is that to think more or less the not yet, or what gives rise to the most to thinking? To wit, that we do not yet think. First here, the one who speaks and shows himself in speaking thus, designating himself in the third person. Der Sprecher. Is he the first because he already thinks that we do not yet think and already says so? Or indeed, is the first not yet to think, then the last to think already that we do not yet think, which would not nonetheless prevent him from speaking in order to be the first to say this. I leave these questions that would merit long developments on the outer situation of this speaking that claims to teach while speaking of teaching, and claims to think what is learning, and claims to teach while speaking of teaching, and claims to think what is learning, and first of learning to think. That is why, Heidegger continues, we are here attempting to learn thinking. Darum versuchen wir hier, das Denken zu lernen. But what is learning in French apprendre? The response, untranslatable in its literalness, passes through a very subtle craftwork, a work of the hand and of the pen among the words Entsprechen, Entsprechung, Zusprechen, Zuspruch. Let me, instead of translating, roughly summarize. To learn, apprendre, is to relate what we are doing to a correspondence, Entsprechung, in us with the essential Wesenhaft. To illustrate this accord with the essence, here in the traditional example of philosophical didactics, that of the joiner, of the apprentice joiner. Heidegger chooses the word Schreiner rather than Tischler, for he tends to speak of an apprentice joiner, Schreiner Lehrling, who works on a cabinet, Schrein. Now he will say later that perhaps thinking too is just something like building a cabinet, wie das Bauen einem Schrein. The apprentice cabinet maker learns not only to use tools, not only to familiarize himself with the use, the utility, the toolness of things for making. If he is a true cabinet maker, he inclines or relates himself to the different ways of the wood itself. He accords himself with the forms that sleep in the wood as it enters man's dwelling. The true joiner accords himself with the hidden plenitude of the wood's essence, and not with the tool and the use value. And I have to stress myself here, it's an odd thing that building and being human was mentioned in the previous lecture as a house or a roof for existing. But with hidden plenitude insofar as it enters the inhabited place. I stress here a quote from Derrida, the value of place or sit for reasons that will appear later, end of quote, and inhabited by man. There is no craft, métier, of the joiner without this correspondence between the essence of the wood and the essence of man, as he is being who inhabits. In German, métier is said handwerk, work of the hand, handiwork, handling, if not maneuver. When French must translate Handwerk by métier, perhaps that is legitimate and cannot be avoided. But it's a bad maneuver, a poor craft of translation, because in it the hand is lost and reintroduced in that translation is what Heidegger wants to avoid. The service rendered, utility, the office, the ministerium, from which I believe the word métier comes. Handwerk, the noble métier, is a manual métier that is not ordered, like any other profession, to public use or interest or in pursuit of profit. Note here, we spoke earlier of humanitas and other Latin-derived words. There is a similar point here made by métier and handwerk. One is closer to the essence and the other one is departed from the essence. And this also goes to show what thinking is. If you depart from the essence, you also depart from thinking. Handwerk, the noble métier, is a manual métier that is not ordered, like any other profession, to public use or interest or in pursuit of profit. This noble métier as hantverk will also be that of the thinker, or the teacher who teaches thinking. The teacher is not necessarily the professor of philosophy. Without this accord with the essence of the wood, itself accorded to man's dwelling, the activity would be empty. It would remain just activity, Beschäftigung, oriented by trade, Geschäft, commerce, and the taste for profit. Implicit, the hierarchizing and the evaluation are no less clear. On the one hand, but also above, towards the best handiwork, guided by the essence of the human dwelling, by the wood of the hut, rather than by the metal or the glass of the cities. On the other hand, but also below, the activity that cuts the hand off from the essential, useful activity, utilitarianism, guided by the capital. To be sure, as Heidegger recognizes, the inauthentic can always contaminate the authentic. The authentic cabinet maker can become a furniture dealer for large stores, supermarkets. Artisan of the dwelling or habitat can become the international corporation named. I think habitat, the hand is in danger, always. All handiwork, all human dealings, handeln, are constantly in that danger. The writing of poetry, das Dichten, is no more exempt from it than is thinking, das Denken. The analogy is double between Dichten and Denken on the one hand, but also, on the other hand, between the two, poetry and thought, and the authentic handiwork, hantverk. To think is a handiwork, says Heidegger explicitly. He says it without any dodge, and without even that, perhaps, that had moderated the analogy of thought with the manufacture of the cabinet that is perhaps like a thought. Here, without analogy and without perhaps, Heidegger declares, at any rate, it is a handwork. Es ist jedenfalls ein Handwerk. A word of the hand in two words. This does not mean that one is thinking with one's hand, as is said in English and French, that one speaks with one's hand when one's discourse is accompanied with voluble gestures, or that one thinks with one's feet, avec ses pieds, when one is, as French has it, bête comme ses pieds, too stupid for words. What does Heidegger mean then? And why does he choose here the hand, whereas elsewhere he more readily accords thought to light or Lichtung? One would say to the eye, or else to hearing and the voice. 3 remarks to prepare a response here. 1. I have chosen this text in order to introduce a reading of Geschlecht. In this text, Heidegger is, in effect, binding thinking and not only philosophy to a thought or to a situation of the body of a man and of human being, Menschheit, that will permit us to glimpse a dimension of Geschlecht, as sex or sexual difference, apropos what is said or not said about the hand. Thinking is not cerebral or disincarnate.
I quote that phrase in my paper about Mark 73. It's a good phrase.
I had to mention, while reading this, I was overtaken by it. It's brilliant. I no longer will put Bohm into the context. He will instead come tonight, I think. 2. Heidegger. Could you give me some coffee, please?
Yes.
I remember now, if there is. Two, Heidegger privileges the hand when speaking of the relations between thought and the craft of teaching. He distinguishes between the current profession and activity, Beschäftigung, oriented by useful service, and the pursuit of profit, Geschäft. And on the other hand, the authentic Handwerk. Now to define the Handwerk, which is not a profession, one must think Werk as work, but also Hand and Handen, that cannot be translated by dealings. The hand must be thought, but the hand cannot be thought as a thing, a being, even less an object. The hand thinks before being thought. It is thought. A thought thinking. Third, my third remark will be more narrowly tied to a classic treatment of Heidegger's politics in the National Socialist context. In all his self-justification after the war, Heidegger presents his discourse on the essence of techniques as a protest, an act of resistance barely disguised against, A. The professionalization of university studies to which the Nazis and their official ideologues have surrounded themselves. Heidegger recalls this concerning his rectorate discourse, that in effect is raised against the professionalism that is also a technologization of studies. B. The submission of the National Socialist philosophy to the dominion and imperatives of technical productivity. The meditation on the authentic hantverk also has the sense of an artisanalist protest against the hand's effacement or debasement in the industrial automation of modern mechanization. This strategy has, one suspects, equivocal effects. It opens up to an archaistic reaction toward the rustic artisan class and denounces business or capital, notions whose associations then are well known. In addition, with the division of labor, what is called intellectual work is what implicitly finds itself thus discredited. Having said this, I want to underscore again the idiomaticity in what Heidegger says to us about the hand. Mit der Hand has es eine eigene Bewandtnis. With the hand, one is dealing with a thing entirely particular, one's own, proper, singular. A thing apart, as the French translation says, while running the risk of letting one think of a separate thing, of a separate substance. As Descartes said of the hand, that it was part of the body. To be sure, but was endowed with such independence that it could also be considered as a complete substance apart and almost separable. Heidegger does not say in this sense that the hand is a thing apart, in that the hand has any proper or particular of its own, eigene. It's not a part of the organic body, nota bene, as the common representation claims, and against which Heidegger invites us to think. I got some thoughts on my own here. There will be no time to continue. In certain languages among Japanese, I mentioned earlier, no separation has become between the doings of the hand and thinking. Shogaitai, bad handwriting, is literally bad thinking. And to point out that it should be some separate thinking going on in the head or somewhere else didn't make any sense until recently, and I think that sense was actually imported from the West. It is so ingrained in the Sino-Japanese culture that to learn, to understand, is the hand, and the hand is the thinking. And it's always skilled. Whereas in the West, we don't even have a word for thinking skill. And I think this is the reason Heidegger introduces Danken and Denken. Danken is a thankful thinking, and that is a skilled thinking. It's a thinking, I would say, in the text it's mentioned technolization, and it's contrasted with humanitas and the Latin derived. That doesn't sound to the heart, at least not for Heidegger. The real thing is in the hand. This is where you learn the elegance of making conclusion, analyzing, understanding.
Yes, in your previous lecture 1143, you went through this book by Michael Ferber, and he comments on Heidegger that so Heidegger's quite a few of Heidegger's etymologies are mistaken, such as his claim that the Greek word for it is necessary is related to the word for hand, that is hair in Greek. But I think that Ferber in this case is missing the point.
Yeah.
So one thing is historical etymology, one is popular etymology. So Heidegger's point was perhaps to highlight the meaning of hand. It's something necessary, I would say.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We don't think of thinking anymore. There is no skill about thinking. Thinking is just transcendental, and I think that is a shame. By making thinking something not of the world and not of doings, we have devalued thinking, made it into something automatic, something technological, like we do with all things. And in the bottom there is metaphors that we haven't looked into, and metaphors that we don't know about, as to cite Johnson in Lakoff Johnson. They will rule us. We have then no option at all, because what we don't know about, we have no defense to. Or rather, if we understand the metaphor, it becomes helpful. We can build it our own way. But let's call it a dead metaphor, like Usia or Stein. They will enforce and friction and fragmentize yourself. And oddly enough, the same thing has caused the split between body and mind. And I thought it was so elegantly funny that they can't call the hand a part of the body. As we say in Swedish, it doesn't get any worse than that. It's absolutely ludicrous. The hand is part of the body. Oh my God. He was out of his wonkers. I think this text, I'm really happy I chose it, or Kalle chose it. It is invigorating. It makes me want to stand on true soil, and I realize that there is always development. Because if we see thinking as not of this world, how can we develop it? How can we make it bigger, finer, more refined? Instead, the only thing we can do, which is an incredible limitation, is to rearrange the concept we already have. There is no newness coming from that. Because as Alexander said yesterday, if you want to understand, you will understand in your own ways. But true understanding comes from a doing, not translating, as we mentioned before. I think that was also part of Derrida's point here, that translating itself is very problematic, not because only of mistranslating, but the idea that you can transfer, I think it's monstrous. It's a monstrosity in itself. That was a pure pleasure. Thank you very much, and have a very pleasant afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.